Good morning, it's February 8th, and this is To My Liberal Friends. Last night, Joe Biden delivered the annual State of the Union address to Congress. It was exactly what I thought it would be, and a classic example of why this event needs to fade away into history. It's no longer a report to the nation, but rather a political rally for the president and his supporters, while the opposition party, whichever one it is, they sit on their hands. Now, a bit of history might give you some insight into why I think it should go away. The formal basis of the State of the Union is from the Constitution, where it states, "The President shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the State of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient." And that's from Article 2, Section 3, Clause 1. This constitutionally mandated presidential message has gone through a few name changes. It was formerly known as the annual message, and that was from 1790 to 1946. It began to informally call the State of the Union until 46, and then in 47 it became officially known as the State of the Union Address. The first radio broadcast of the message was by President Calvin Coolidge in 1923. The first televised broadcast was by Harry Truman in 47, and the first evening delivery of a message was by President Lyndon Johnson in 1965. Televising the speech in prime time is what has changed the State of the Union address into a political rally. If it went back to a written report to Congress, we'd have none of the political stunts each president pulls. We would have no invited guests introduced and force members of Congress to stand and applaud. And last night was another example of partisanship that needs to fade away as an annual event. Biden started out with a bit of a truth stretcher when he mentioned that his administration has created 800,000 good-paying jobs. What he failed to mention was the vast majority of those jobs were ones that were lost during the pandemic due to government actions forcing businesses to either lay off workers or go out of business. Once the pandemic was over, many of these jobs returned, so they were not really created. He put a rosy spin on gas prices by saying they're coming down. He put the same rosy spin on inflation by saying it was finally coming down. What he did not say was the gas price had more than doubled since he took office, and the inflation was at 1.4% when he took office and soared to over 9%. He did not mention that it took historic rise in interest rates by the Federal Reserve to try and tame inflation. According to Joe Biden, his actions solved these problems, but of course, he was not to blame for them in the first place. He recalled the CHIPS and Science Act as bringing technology jobs back to the United States, but failed to say that technology companies are now laying off thousands upon thousands of people. And to prove my point that this is not a report to Congress, but a political speech, he talked about his economic plan and how it's remembering people that were, in his words, left behind, and said, quote, "Maybe that's you watching at home," end quote. How's that reporting to Congress? Now we have to look at what he wants to do, at least according to his speech. He wants to expand Medicaid, but he doesn't say how he's going to pay for that expansion. And I'll quote him on the following statement so as not get it wrong. He's talking about taxing corporations, by his definition, wealthy people. Quote, "I'm a capitalist. Just pay your fair share." And I think a lot of you at home agree with me that our present tax system is simply unfair. The idea that in 2020, 55 of the biggest companies in America made $40 billion in profits and paid zero in federal income taxes. That's simply not fair. But now, because of the law I signed, billion-dollar companies have to pay a minimum of 15%. Just 15%. That's less than a nurse pays. Let me be clear. Under my plan, nobody earning less than $400,000 a year will pay an additional penny in taxes. Not one penny, end quote. Well, Mr. President, I can assure you that people making under $400,000 a year are paying more in taxes under your economic plan. You can pretend they're not, but we all know they are. Then comes the most blatant lie of the entire speech. He says the previous administration, meaning Donald Trump, raised the deficit, and by that the national debt, by more than anyone else. When Trump left office, the national debt was just under $21 trillion, up from $17 trillion for when he took office. Today, that debt is over $31 trillion, and that's why we're in this crisis of having to raise the debt limit. I think $4 trillion to $10 trillion means you're raising it more than anybody else. But he could not stop there. He had to top that lie with another one when he talked about Social Security and Medicare. Remember, Kevin McCarthy said those two programs would be not touched. They would not be part of the debt limit negotiations. But Biden said that some Republicans, which could mean one or two, want to end these programs. He knows that's not part of the Republican platform, but he wants to scare you, so he says it. Now, one of the most hilarious statements in the speech dealt with non-compete agreements. They're pretty standard in some industries, especially for people who have key information in their jobs. But Biden took it to a laughable extreme. He said, his words, not mine, quote, "So a cashier at a burger place can't cross the street to take the same job at another burger place to make a couple bucks more," end quote. I don't think McDonald's or Burger King are making teenagers sign non-compete agreements. How about you? Of course, then he had to throw a sop to the unions and demand that companies allow employees to unionize without any opposition. Just roll over and let them do it. He then pretended that he was not responsible for the crisis on the border and that the Vice President Harris is doing everything possible to solve it. I guess that's everything but visiting the border. He said it was up to Congress to fix it, but he did not mention that he was not enforcing the laws on the books, which is the obligation of the executive branch. He did not know, or at least pretended not to know, that interviews with illegal immigrants have them saying they believe Biden changed the law and welcomed them to cross the border. Now, I'm going a little longer today, so I want to close with one thing. He had the parents of Ty Nichols in the gallery, and it was a tragedy this young man was killed by police officers. He had them stand up for the obligatory ovation, but where was the mention of the NYPD police officer that was killed by a career criminal who had been released numerous times? All that young officer was doing was trying to buy a used car, and now his wife is a widow with 2 young children. Don't you think, Mr. President, you should call out the criminals for what they are and demand they quit being released over and over? Stop this bail reform crap. That would have brought the Republicans to their feet, while your fellow Democrats would have sat on their hands and shook their heads in disagreement. What we need to do is take this back to a written report to Congress. And if we really were writing about the State of the Union to Congress, what we would say is, our national deficit is out of control. We're spending too much money and we have to quit spending. Crime is rampant in this country and we have to crack down on criminals and start putting them away. That's the kind of stuff that people know affects them. So this has been To My Liberal Friends. If you enjoy the podcast, please hit the subscription button on either Spotify or YouTube. Thanks for listening and keep listening.